Mr. President, get down! Gentlemen, welcome back to the Managerial Outcomes channel, a channel that lacks Geneva Convention oversight. It is not governed by the rule of law, and it operates in international waters, not adhering to any sort of piracy code. Now, today we are going over the Agency Arms Glock 19 that I got from, where did I get it from? Agency Arms, good guess. We're going over this gun because I find Gucci Glocks interesting. I was a man wearing a blue uniform. Few years ago now actually, and I was paid to carry a Glock 17, and so I have a large affinity for the Glock platform. I entrusted my life to it. I love them dearly, and I still love them, though I don't carry them as much as I used to, nor do I get paid to carry them. Technically, I still get paid to carry a Glock on camera. Funny enough, go figure, life's a flat circle. So I met one of the guys that works over at Agency by the name of Paul Van Dunk. Now, Paul was interested in getting me an Agency gun to check out and try out. What came of that is this particular Glock 19X. They tricked up a Glock 19X and they sent it over my way to check out. I've been shooting and scooting with this thing for a little bit now, and I've had it out in a number of range sessions, and I decided it is finally time to talk about it. Now, of course, there was no exchange of money whatsoever, and this isn't necessarily going to be a super high in-depth review, just more so me regurgitating some thoughts. Essentially, in this video, I'm going to talk about some things I like, don't like, address a little bit of the pop culture, and some controversy that goes in with the Agency Arms brand gun, from what I have seen in the internet zeitgeist. So with that being said, let's dive on in. If you've ever shot an Agency Arms. So as I was saying, I have a lot of affinity for a Glock. I've used the Glock a bit. I've qualified with the Glock. This was a very similar setup I carried on patrol, just with a much worse Trijicon Gen 1 RMR. I like the RMR, but I'm an Aimpoint Acro fanboy, and if I can, all my handguns that I plan on seriously using will have an Aimpoint Acro. So, big fan of that setup, and I have a lot of love and nostalgia for my Glock 17. Now, when I quit the PD, they wouldn't let me keep it. I asked to buy it, but since I was leaving under bad terms, mandatory vaccine, I couldn't necessarily get that gun. So essentially, I cloned my own Glock 17, and I've had it ever since. Fun side story. The Glock 17, the reason I talk about this, it's like how my baseline for my handguns, right? If it doesn't pass my Glock 17 sniff test, whatever weird quads I think that means, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, I don't know how else to explain it. Essentially, the quality of standards up to a Glock 17, then why would I touch it? So when Agency Arms reached out and said, hey, we have this Gucci Glock for you to try out, Glock 19X, full-sized frame with the compact, more compact, I should say, slide of the Glock 19, we want to send it your way. I was like, all right, cool, I'll check it out, me being a big Glock fanboy. I've always heard of and I've always known of the Gucci Glock market. I remember Glocks going back to like Salient Arms, Zev, Agency, you know, I always kind of knew of these brands, but I was never one myself to go out of my way to acquire a Gucci Glock. I've shot them before, I've handled them before. I thought, wow, what a nice handgun. Very nice handguns. Excellent controls, very nice trigger. No one knows a better trigger than me. I know how to trigger anybody. Terrible Trump impersonation.
I am your voice.
So when I got this, I was excited and I was rip-roaring through it. Now, there's some notable things to go over about this gun. So starting with the frame, you'll notice that the frame is stippled. Now, I will give them props because this is actually a pretty good stipple job in my opinion. If you ever tried to stipple anything yourself, chances are you really wet the bed, and it took you a bit to even get good at it if you ever did get good at it. So the fact that this came up stippled, looking good, means that it is really nice, and with the stippling done by hand, it means technically that your frame, if you get it stippled through them, is going to be unique to you. So that's kind of neat. Now, another thing I really like is going to be the flared magwell they added on to the bottom. So one thing that I honestly am not a big fan of, for the most part, is flared magwells, funny enough. I just don't find them necessary on my guns. I think they're a nice addition if you're like, oh gee golly, trying to get that mag in there and you have a little bit of extra flare to get it in there, then that can be nice. But the problem is, for a lot of flared magwells that I run into, say on this, for instance, on this Shadow System gun, you can see how big the flare is. And of course, I'm playing B-roll over this because I play 4D chess on YouTube. It's a much bigger flare. Now, why I don't really like that, if you're carrying it in your pants, it's just a little bit more gun. It's not the end of the world, right? It's just a preference thing. For me personally, you may be all about the flare, baby. So that could be a thing. But for me personally, for me in my house, we're not the biggest flare fans. So the fact that they have a much more compacted magwell flare, I think that's a nice touch. I actually like that. Now, moving on to the trigger, they have a custom Agency Arms trigger in there, and I'm gonna be honest, it's actually a pretty nice trigger. So I actually do like that trigger a lot compared to the stock Glock trigger. That being said, I did get pretty good with my stock Glock for knowing the trigger in and out. So a custom trigger on a Glock to me wasn't always super necessary, because if you shoot your Glock a lot, what was that? There's always a train, a plane, or a car when we go out to film. I cannot escape the industrial complex unless I go miles and miles out to the wilderness. My brothers, the Industrial Revolution has had dire consequences. I can never escape the Industrial Revolution. So for me personally, a custom trigger or a Gucci Glock, it's a little bit foreign. So getting a nice trigger in a Glock has always been, oh my God, that's so loud. The boy yearns for the trains. So the trigger itself is pretty nice. I'll give him props in that. It's a nice little trigger. It feels good. You know what a good trigger feels like if you ever tried one. And it does a decent job. So another thing that we have below the trigger on the frame is we have additional stippling. Now I like that because if you're getting your hand up in there, it gives you just a little bit more grip with that support hand. So it looks like they also deepen the hand groove, unless that comes stock on the 19X. Funny enough, I can't remember if it does actually come stock on a normal 19X, but compared to say the Glock 17 right here, you can see how much beefier that trigger guard is. And Agency removed a little bit of that and chunked it out, making a nice higher grip on the gun. Ideally, when you have a handgun like this, if you can get your hand as high up into the gun as possible, it helps with much more accurate follow-up shots, and it helps mitigate recoil, all that important shooting stuff. Because with a handgun shooting, every little edge does actually help out, because mastering handguns is a little bit harder than mastering a rifle, because you're either shooting it with one hand or you're only getting two, and that's only like 2 points of contact, or one technically. So everything does help. That's what I'm trying to say, guys. Okay. So another thing that is a frame cut up here is, and it's stippled as well, so when you're holding the gun, it gives you just even that much more leverage on it if you wanted to use that. So I do like that. The frame seems pretty well thought out with all the cuts and additions that they did, because I do think they have some good shooters over there working for them at Agency Arms. Now, the slide is where things start to get a little bit more interesting as far as the gun goes, because everything on the frame is pretty well thought out, but it's not that crazy. It's like, okay, cool. The only two things that are seem a little bit more Agency is going to be the flared magwell and the trigger, and then the cuts are like, okay, the cuts make sense. Now the slide is where things get a little bit more interesting. Now the slide is pretty cut up, has a really cool looking aesthetic, and it has some practicality to it. Now one interesting thing is going to be their base plate for the optics, and I actually think they are pretty decent. So it kind of reminds me of some Langdon Tactical vibes, who I don't know who came first, the chicken or the egg, or who got to this first, but on their Glocks, they essentially have that base plate system that screws in on the top over here, and then you can have your optic mounting system back there. Now it does look pretty good compared to, say, a stock Glock like this, right? Where it's just a different style of base plate. I'm totally blanking on all the names, but for an acro, it works. And it has the built-in iron sights on the back that you can co-witness with your front iron sight through the red dots. So I do like that. Now, as far as the internals go, on the Agency Arms slide, they did swap out some of the guts for their parts. So they got a little different trigger and barrel, and then the slide work itself. So you got the Agency Arms barrel, you got the slide, and then you have an Agency Arms spring. Now, I will say the spring does look aesthetic with that blued nut at the front. Who cares? No, but it does look good. And I'll give them props, because the aesthetic of the gun does look really cool. They don't only just look cool, but they are trying to match a certain level of balance to them, a little bit of weight management, whatever that may be, right? Now, this gun does look cool, but it doesn't look as cool as this video sponsor can make you look. Americana Pipe Dream Apparel, guys, fantastic young Zoomers getting after it in the military space, doing the Lord's work, night vision knives, manuals, clothing. Get some sick drip over at AP. They have been supporting the channel for a bit now, and they want to support your wardrobe, i.e. in exchange for your hard-earned money, they will make you look like a warlord in the apocalypse. Pretty good deal. Now, of course, I also have to thank Optics Planet, because not only did Aimpoint supply me acros, but Optics Planet also supplied me acros, and they have been the optics sponsor of the second channel. Big thank you to Optics Planet. So use code LARP for 7% off the entire store, and yet again, a big thank you to Optics Planet. Oh, jeez. So one thing I weirdly enjoyed is the mags they sent over. So they sent me over some Glock FDE mags, and they even took the time to stipple one of the mags, and it looks pretty freaking sick when you frame it together and match it. Like, vibes. Check, I like that. They also included some of their own proprietary Agency Arms base plates for them, some extensions, also passes the vibe check. So I wanted to mention that because that does look cool. When paired together, it does add a little bit of flair and flavor to the gun. Technically, this doesn't overall affect the function or anything, but it's still kind of sick, like it's a vibe. I will say when the gun is fully loaded in the hand, the mag, it has a nice weight to it, has a good feel in the hand. I do like that. They crushed it with the stick point. I will give them that. All that stuff is cool, but how does it translate to the end user, shooting it on the flat range or in any line of duty? Well, essentially, to me, shooting a Glock like this, if I'm being brutally honest, the trigger was the nicest experience and everything else is kind of like a nice little bonus. Like the trigger and the stippling, I could feel. So it's like, all right, you have a great grip on the gun and then you have a nice trigger to work with for fast follow-up shots. So to that, I like. Everything else, to be brutally honest, in my opinion, still felt just like I'm shooting a Glock. Whenever I get a tricked up Glock, it's like, okay, I'm just shooting a nicer version of a stock Glock. I know maybe people may not like me saying that, but it's essentially what it kind of feels like. So it kind of leads into the controversy of the price point, because a Gucci Glock like this starts to really jump up in the price point. Now, this is where we get to kind of some different thought process and some different thinking. Me personally, I'm always a sucker for my stock Glock 17. It has everything I need. It's tried and true. It has all the Glock parts that have gone through a rigorous R&D process. I use this, I trusted my life to it. Hundreds of thousands of other people, not only here in the US, but around the world, trust their life to Glocks in this configuration. And to really amplify the Glock usage, what you can do, you get some suppressor size sights, then you get a red dot, and of course, your weapon light, whatever your flavor of poison is, Surefire X300, Aimpoint Acro P2. And now you have a really good duty weapon. Closed emitter, I personally love Aimpoint, and so it works out. Even though this gun has some good attachments, the base price was still $500-600. You have $600-ish red dot and then a $300-ish weapon light. So then you have your $1,500 handgun right here with your attachments on it. Now that does sound like a lot, but it's getting a lot done because with this setup right now, I can shoot this under nods passively with the red dot, swap it out with the Surefire Vampire. Now I have an IR flood that I can use to help illuminate a target under nods. It's doing everything I want without the Gucci mods that would cost more money of, say, the Gucci handgun or Gucci Glock market. Now, if you take a gun like this, where there's a lot of aftermarket work that goes into it, it's essentially you're paying a lot more. Yes, is it a cool product? I think it's cool. I think it looks cool. I think there's some sex appeal to it, and I think it shoots fine. But is it 100% necessary in my opinion? No, I don't think it's 100% necessary. Are they gonna get mad that I say that? I don't know. I don't care. Is it still a cool gun? Yes. So there is all of that, right? I know I'm like giving you a lot of my thought process here and you're like, what's going on? Don't worry, my brother in Christ. I too am finding my way to the valley of the shadow of death. To me, that's kind of like how I think about this. Yes, Gucci Glock cool, but stock Glock with the same attachments, get job done, just good. A lot of that to say. I'd probably just roll a TLDR. TLDR, beginning of this video. Gucci Glock, good. Stock Glock, in my opinion, just as good. Of course, the stock Glock doesn't have the nice trigger or the stippling done to it or the aestheticness of the slide. So if you are someone that leans toward the Gucci Glock vibe, hey, by all means, my man, head out there and get one. I think it's cool. I think it's a vibe. I like shooting it. I think it's fun. But if you're someone balling on a budget, you don't have to worry about wait times for setting your frame off or your slide off to get work done, then hey, by all means, my good man, your red dot and your weapon light are going to get the job done without any of the fancy thrills to it. Now, me ragging on this in that sense, I feel like it's not that bad, and I feel like it's pretty fair assessment. I feel like anyone in the comments would say, yeah, it's pretty fair. Like, if you don't want to spend the money on the Gucci Glock build, by all means. But I will say there is that sex appeal that comes back to having a cool handgun like this. When you're tricking out your Glock and you finally, it's like, to me, it's like the maxed out setting of the Glock, right? Almost maxed out. The next setting would be a switch on the back, and that would be mega based. But borderline maxed out setting for a Glock, right? You have your red dot, your light, and then you have your custom framework and your custom slide work. And then you're pretty much at the higher tier of what the Glock could be. And from there, there's really nowhere else to go. So I have kind of ragged on it, and as much as I do love my stock Glock 17, I still think this is cool. Now, there is controversy from what I've seen in the zeitgeist a little bit on the internet sphere is that there's a lot of folks that don't really like Agency that much, and I think it's kind of lumping them all of the Gucci Glock brands together, essentially for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. It's like, okay, my stock Glock with a red dot on light does just as good as this. So I know I'm saying the just as good phrase, but in this sense, it kind of does apply, but with the caveat, as far as like service, duty, application goes. If you wanted to rock this in a competition setting, I think it's that much better. But of course, the streets are technically the final competition. It's a two-way competition. So there is merit to having a better trigger in there, perhaps better performance, better play shots at distance, yada, 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 whatever you may justify in your brain. So I do see the need for more tricked out Glocks if that is your preference. So all that to say, there is still something really cool about this, and that is going to be the pop culture appearances of the Agency Arms gun in movies. Movies such as Extraction 2. Agency Arms also shows up in John Wick. It also shows up, I think, in the movie Bright, Suicide Squad 2, Black Adam, IMFDB. Thank you, IMFDB. So there is some pop culture appeal. And I do like that kind of stuff. Me being a gun nerd and a movie nerd, I like seeing when the two intertwine. And it's cool to see a handgun that now I own in a mainstream movie. And of course, this applies to some of my other handguns like a Colt Python, The Walking Dead, or any other famous Hollywood movie. But it is a neat factor to that. So a cool thing is if you're a big fan of those movies, you can potentially have your own version of an Agency Arms gun that appeared in those in your collection, which I think is neat, and it's a practical handgun. Is it going to cost more money? Yes, of course. When it comes to getting stuff done here in America now, production costs, labor, the time that just of course goes into it is all kind of like the same thing. But it is of course going to cost more money. I will say I'd give them props. The aesthetic looks good. I like the feel of the handgun. I love the stippling. The stippling I'm a big fan of, except if I'm not rocking an undershirt and it's in my pants rubbing against my stomach, then I don't become a fan of the stippling. But if I'm using it and just burning it down to flat range, I like that rough texture grip of the stippling job and the framework and the trigger. So is it the right handgun for you? That's up to you, man. I don't know your budget. I don't know your life. I'm just a guy on YouTube showing off cool guns, having a good time doing so, and spilling out some of my thoughts and what I think. So there is that. Gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for stopping by real quick to check out the Agency Arms Glock 19X that they sent over. As always, I have nothing else for you. Catch you guys on the flip. What's up? Just chilling in my garage. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Managerial. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Managerial Outcomes channel, a channel that likes Licks? What the?
Well, I don't know what you thought you heard out there.